So, thanks y'all for coming out on the last Friday before Thanksgiving and the last Friday of GIS week. Maybe we can give a big round of applause for GIS week. To the GGSO board, and not in the room is Lois, Rachel, and Zach, who were instrumental in the room reservations, the food orchestrations, and all of that. So if you see them, please, sing your praises because they made this very much possible. Great. So now, without further ado, I get to introduce our esteemed Geospatial Forum speaker and GIS Week speaker. So yeah, thanks so much for coming out. And yeah, I'll do the introduction and then you'll get to hear from him. So Dr. Emil Cherrington is a research scientist at the Earth System Science Center, ESSC, of the University of Alabama in Huntsville. He also serves as the Regional Science Coordination Lead for West Africa for the NASA SERVIR program on capacity building. If you don't know what NASA SERVIR is, you're gonna hear all about it, but I'll give you a taste. It is a joint initiative of NASA and the U.S. Agency for USAID with geospatial organizations in Asia, Africa, Latin America, and NASA SERVIR addresses critical environmental and food security challenges, among other challenges at a global scale. He has almost 19 years of professional experience working with geographic information systems and remote sensing, focusing on using such technologies for land cover, change detection, ecosystem monitoring, disaster response, and integrated water resource management. Working closely with the first SERVIR global hub in Panama, Dr. Cherrington has helped bring satellite-based geospatial data and tools to enhance decision-making processes. And now to all the education stuff, he holds a joint PhD in forest ecology with an emphasis on remote sensing from Agro-Paris Tech in France, the Technische Universität Dresden in Germany, under the European Commission's Erasmus Mundus Fellowship Program. He also holds a master's in forest resources from the University of Washington's College of Forest Resources and a bachelor's degree in biology from Loyola University, Maryland. So let's give a warm welcome.
Well, thank you to Rebecca and team for inviting me here to speak with you for the next 3 hours about. What Rebecca just said. So let's see. The cool thing was we provided prompts that I was supposed to respond to, and I saw, of course, that colleague or friend Ku Cheng Wu got to give the same talk last year, and it was recorded on you guys' YouTube. So I had to copy some of his answers for what I'm gonna say now, but not really. So, well, I could stand up here and talk for the next few hours about, which I'm partly gonna talk about. So once upon a time, I was a grad student just like y'all. So as mentioned before, I got to do undergrad at a small private school called Loyola in Maryland. I also got to go to the University of Washington. After that, I had to go back to my home country of Belize, where I spent about 1.5 years working for the government of Belize. Bunch of acronyms that folks here will not remember, but I worked for the National Land Advisory Committee, which was a part of the Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment. Then I worked for the Coastal Zone Management Authority Institute. Coming out of that, I had also not known a whole lot about the SERVIR program, but essentially got recruited to go work in Panama at Cathalac, which is this regional center based in Panama, where I worked on the SERVIR Metro America program for a while. Then after 9 years of being out of school, I decided to go back to school. Was fortunate to get a fellowship to do my PhD in France as well as in Germany. And then for the last 8 or so years, I've been in Huntsville, Alabama, working for the University of Alabama in Huntsville, supporting the SERVIR Science Coordination Office, which is based out of the NASA Marshall Space Flight Center. I'm not gonna give you all the details on that, but yeah, just to say, as a young kid growing up, and I guess I will go further back in time, but as a kid, from Central America, I never imagined that because of work, especially, I get to see, quite a bit of the world. and through work. Just to say, some interesting things to, I guess, to highlight there. There's a satellite currently orbiting us called Sentinel-6 Michael Freilich. And so this is the late Dr. Michael Freilich. He was the head of NASA's Earth Science Division. And because of my work with SERVIR, I had the opportunity on different occasions to meet with him and chat with him. He was a really nice guy before his untimely passing. Through my very first year working at Cathalac, got to meet the president of Panama. So there was a flooding event in 2006 when I was like 11 months in or something. I get called by my boss on a Saturday. It says, "Hey, the president of Panama is coming to our office. Like, get your butt down here like right now." I had to do that. So this is the president of Panama at the time, Martin Torrijos, the vice president of Panama, etc. Through severe stuff, I've gotten to meet some. I got to see the ESA launcher down in French Guyana in Kourou when I was doing my PhD there, et cetera, et cetera. So just a quick highlight. Again, originally from Belize, I've lived there, lived in Panama, got to live a little bit in France and Germany, and this slide has cut off. I've also obviously lived here in the US. So trajectory, and I guess trying to answer the slide, answer the prompt from the slide. I was born in 1980, shortly after this satellite image was acquired there. That's from the Landsat 3 satellite, which no longer works because it's been dead for a long time now. I was born in December 80. Curiously enough, there's one of the first decent mosaics of the country Belize from November 80. Those are my parents, Emilia, after whom I'm named, and my late father, Glenn. They got married in 79. Here's a picture of, really blurred picture took a picture of a picture. It's me back in 84 with my grandparents, uncles, etc., cousins. And then just to say that, flash forward in 1995 when I was in high school in Belize, of all places, a gentleman named Maxime Faget. He was a scientist who'd worked on the Mercury program with NASA, came to our high school in Belize. He had been born in Belize to actually, I think, French parents, but emigrated to the US and just kind of hey, we got to meet a real live NASA person. But just to say that, back then when I was a kid, the one thing I really wanted to do, especially because we didn't have universities in Belize for most of my youth, I really wanted to study. I really wanted to kind of just take university for as far as I could go. And so I was really fortunate to, out of Belize, get a scholarship to study at a private university, Loyola University in Maryland. And just to point out, kind of what I studied, I did a degree in biology. And so I think some of the folks in here, have come to geospatial from different life paths, et cetera. But for me, one of the reasons why I wanted to study biology is, as you can probably see from the picture, I come from a really mixed background, mixed family in Belize and in Central America, overall we're, ethnically quite diverse, et cetera. And so I grew up on stories about, ancestors some of whom were, Maya, so Native Americans in that part of the world, ancestors who come from, Africa, ancestors who come from Europe. And the thing is, biology really spoke to me. And then, long story short, jumping a little bit forward in time, I did, 23andMe. This is in 2014. By the time I'd already had a was already doing my PhD then, but to kind of get some of the things, the family stories essentially kind of confirmed. But the reason why I threw this slide up there, when I was doing a degree in biology at the place where I was studying, Loyola, they didn't have a program focusing on population genetics, which would be the branch of biology, which was what was interesting to me. And so maybe because I didn't get to study that is ultimately kind of why I'm standing here. And just to also say that in 2001, there was something called the Human Genome Project that was still underway. And it was because of the Human Genome Project that we essentially knew, well, among other things, a lot of information about the human genome, which could later be, seen in things like 23andMe. But again, jumping around in time, family history was always important to me. didn't really have a whole lot of kind of geographic connection. But around the same time, the same year actually that I did 23andMe, I had the opportunity while doing my PhD program to go back to Belize for a little while. And I went to the National Archives, and I was able to get, records of, different ancestors of mine, and find out that I'm descended from a line of people who were actually woodcutters. So it's maybe hard to see here, but it says rank or profession of the father, mahogany cutter. And this is one of my direct male ancestors. And it was a little while afterwards that somebody else I was talking to them like, hey, I found out I'm descended from people who used to, cut forests and stuff. And this person said, isn't that kind of ironic that you're, studying conservation and protecting forests, and your ancestors used to, cut forests down? I said, I never thought of it that way, but pretty cool. So just to, say, so did my degree in biology, and kind of, I don't know, serendipity or kind of random that one of the things I got a scholarship, or I had a scholarship through the Organization of American States, decided to pursue a forestry degree at the University of Washington. Similar kind of setup to here, where you folks have the College of Natural Resources, and at UW at the time we had the College of Forest Resources. And it was going to be a little while before I ended up going back to school to do my PhD. But while I was, wrapping up my master's degree, and I mentioned this to some of you who are in the studio this morning, at that time, the only free source of satellite imagery, particularly for places outside the US, was the University of Maryland had something set up called the Global Land Cover Facility. And that was the first time I was able to see satellite images and kind of not touch them and feel them with my hands and fingers, but interact with GIS data. By that time, I'd already taken, a GIS course at the University of Washington that was taught by a great instructor, Phil Hurwitz, who's now a professor in urban planning, I believe. But I guess the thing that I kind of took away from satellite images, and I hope that those of you who are here and in the center and are, also looking at different types of geospatial and Earth observation data, was that for me, the imagery wasn't just beautiful, but it was kind of, these were puzzles that we had to figure out what was inside, You look at a pixel and you wonder, okay, why is this portion this color green, but this other portion a different shade of green? Why are we seeing the things that we're seeing? And that was kind of something that stuck with me from back in 2004, when again, was the first time I had any kind of exposure to satellite images. And later with my working career, things moved on. But also just to mention that in my, last month or so of finishing up my master's program, I had done a search, probably not a Google search, maybe a Yahoo search for satellite imagery Belize. And a Science at NASA article came up, and it was called Keeping an Eye on Central America. And that's, some images that come up from that article. It was published in late April, and they talked about this new program that was going to launch in Central America. It was going to be called SERVIR, which is the Spanish word to serve. And it was talking about how, NASA was collaborating with governments in the region to set up this unique monitoring program for Central America. I read about this article and I thought, hey, this sounds pretty cool, but I didn't think too much of it. But just to highlight, and I know Varun knows the face on that slide there. This is Dan Irwin. He's essentially my boss at the SERVIR program now. But again, just through coincidence of doing the search and finding about this cool program that, again, at the time I didn't think much of what would happen, but what became of SERVIR. And so SERVIR is, as mentioned before, this partnership between NASA and the US Agency for International Development. And back in 2005, when it was officially launched, shortly after that article was written, the focus was on countries ranging from Belize all the way down to Panama. And again, just something I was thinking of. And one of the reasons why SERVIR essentially had come into being was back in the 1990s, the Wildlife Conservation Society, which is an NGO that's based at the Bronx Zoo, I believe, had come up with this concept called Paseo de Pantera, or the Path of the Panther, or the Path of the Jaguar, where they have this idea of, what if, conservation efforts could be done across the entire region to preserve, essential wildlife habitat for species like jaguar. And I guess one other interesting thing about Central America, where I'm from, represents, this land bridge bridging North America and South America, represents less than 1% of the Earth's landmass, but it's home to about 9% of the world's terrestrial species, which makes it acre per acre, hectare per hectare, more biodiverse, at least in terms of terrestrial species, than even the Amazon. And so just interesting little tidbit there. And so I guess I'll kind of jump forward, answer the other question about geospatial approaches and the work that I do, as mentioned before, and I'll try to link this back. I now work for I work for the SERVIR program, as mentioned before, this joint initiative of USAID, NASA, regional agencies, including one of which is ICIMAD that we see represented here, and our colleague Varun here used to work for ICIMAD and was another part of the SERVIR program, and it's really nice to see a familiar face in the audience. And just to say that with the SERVIR program, the work that we're currently doing, and which I contribute to, we're working with different regions spanning from Latin America, Central America, Amazonia, to West Africa, East Africa, the Hindu Kush Himalaya region where Varun hails from, and the Southeast Asia region. And also just an interesting little thing here, and just, because you'll probably notice it on the map as well. Since about 2012, SERVIR has had these applied science teams where they've also pulled on US-based research and said, how can this research that's being done here in the US also, be of benefit to the different regions in other parts of the world. Just interesting little thing noticing here that so far, I guess, universities in North Carolina haven't been a part of our bigger SERVIR network, but of course, hoping that this map gets updated and changes soon, and we have, other great research that we're seeing done here at this university that can also be leveraged for the work that SERVIR is doing. And then just to quickly say on that point as well, what kind of work do we work on? Varun was mentioning earlier when he worked at ICIMAD, he was supporting work in the agriculture and food security realm, but we also do work on what we call water security, ecosystem and carbon management. And at the Science Coordination Office, I serve as the thematic lead for ecosystem and carbon management. We also do work on weather and climate resilience, and more recently on air quality and health. And the general idea with SERVIR, as mentioned before, is we might have some really interesting work that's done in one region, and how can we also apply that to other regions? So a number of you were in the studio activity this morning, and the long and the short is, we have a SERVIR PI, Robert Kennedy from Oregon State University. He developed some really innovative stuff with his land trender algorithm, originally in the Pacific Northwest. And he's applied that work in Southeast Asia. And we've also taken that and applied that in the Central American context. And so just the general idea, and of course, the work there you see regarding ICIMAD, there's a tool developed by a researcher from Brigham Young University. It was originally called the streamflow prediction tool that's now been leveraged at a much larger scale, and just, other examples of South-South collaboration, North-South collaboration, et cetera. But just in terms of some of the work that I do directly, I'd like to just highlight, and apologies for those of you who were in the studio before, that I'm recycling some of the slides that you would have seen this morning, to say that this first work that we did with SERVIR that I started off with had to do with land cover monitoring. And so kind of why, if we put things in context and we take a trip down memory lane and go back 20 years or so, 20 years ago, it was essentially hard to get access to satellite imagery for multiple reasons. But one of the things that the countries in the region that essentially requested the creation of a SERVIR program to begin with, one of the ideas was, can satellite data from NASA be leveraged to tell us what's happening in what's called the Mesoamerican Biological Corridor? And so, yeah. And as mentioned before, my role in SERVIR, I work on ecosystem and carbon management. We used to have a thematic area called land cover, land use, and ecosystems. And just kind of bringing it back to my biology degree, when I first learned about biological diversity or biodiversity, one of the things we learned was that biodiversity was represented at 3 different levels, at the broadest scale, at the highest level at ecosystems, but also at the quantities of species that we have in the world, and at an even finer scale, the genes, right? And so one of the interesting things that I've always found, if we look at like hyperspectral imagery that comes from satellites, like this EO1 data from NASA, we could kind of see how these, broad scale reflectance patterns that we're seeing, that's ultimately really influenced by the leaves, which also has a lot to do with, the types of tree species that we have. So ultimately it's, genetics influencing at these bigger landscape levels. And so again, when I looked at, when I first saw satellite imagery, kind of like, why is this area green and this area a different shade, et cetera? And of course, it has, not just to do with the species, it has to do with the topography, it has to do with different environmental drivers, et cetera, et cetera. But for me, it's always been, one of these kind of like puzzles or things that I've wanted to figure out a little bit more about. And so, as also mentioned before, for those who caught the studio this morning, back in 2009, the US Geological Survey and NASA opened up their archive of Landsat data, which prior to 2009, essentially, well, not essentially, but this imagery had a cost. And when I was working with SERVIR Mesoamerica, one of the things that I got to do was take imagery from, that had been liberated, as it were, from 1980, the year I was born, 89, 94, 2000, 2004, 2010, and use it in a, say, not super sophisticated fashion to come up with, a map of, changing land cover in the country where I was born. And so, like, for me, it was, that we could take this raw data, this raw imagery, and essentially convert it into an information product, which we'd actually done jointly with the Ministry of Natural Resources of Belize, where they were interested also in saying, okay, what does all this data ultimately mean for us in terms of land management and what's occurring? And of course, I guess maybe the not so happy part of the story is across Central America, across, the tropics in the world, we're seeing, so much land cover change. We can look at this in different ways, but, biodiverse habitats that are being lost because of conversion to other land covers, other uses. Something else that I guess I also find really interesting, and in the studio this morning, we got to, play around with Google Earth Engine as, one of the multiple platforms that's out there. Last week, I got to, for their GIS Day celebration, address students at the University of Belize, which didn't exist when I was studying, which is, bless you, which is why I had to, go abroad to study. But I gave them a quick little summary and said, if we use Google Earth Engine, we can actually query and find out all the imagery, at least from public sources, that are available for the country of Belize. And it's, terabytes and terabytes worth of data. But of course, for you folks who are working studying at the Center for Geospatial Analytics, how could we make sense of these just astronomical volumes of data, right? If we're thinking Landsat data, over 1,000, individual images or mosaics available. If we're thinking something like MODIS, where, MODIS images the world every single day, 17,000 scenes acquired since February 2000. So how do we take advantage of all of that? And at least on the server side, using tools like Earth Engine has been a part of that. But not just Earth Engine in combination with algorithms created by researchers who work at centers like the CGA. In this case, again, the land trainer algorithm developed by the eMapper lab at Oregon State University that has allowed us to, say, take, again, 40 years worth of Landsat data, which amounts to something like 7,000 individual scenes. Those can be compressed into 41 annual snapshots. And with the compute provided by Google, take all of that data and essentially make sense of it. Other cool stuff I've heard of that's being worked on here at the CGA, looking at phenology. Can we take MODIS data from every single day and find out, look at trends that are happening? And so just some really cool stuff that is possible. And you folks, you are on the ground floor of that, because as students, this is the chance when you get to kind of work on anything that's possible, right? And so I guess to move off into the very last part of the presentation, kind of what, at least my perspective on the future of geospatial analytics in this area that I'm working in. I'd like to kind of take us back in the past before I answer the question, and just to say that I feel fortunate that I've had the opportunity to see paradigms shift in so many ways over the last almost 20 years or so. There was a time, I'm not gonna go through all 14 things on the slide, but Landsat used to cost money. It used to be difficult to get, automated, products generated in an automated fashion, like even surface reflectance data that we now find kind of routine. When I was a grad student, in France, I had to, learn Linux so that I could implement a system called LeadApps, to process that data down myself. Whereas folks now, you don't have to deal with that. I, as well as other colleagues, was a part of what's called the SERVIR Silocarbon SAR Handbook, where we, put together, working with subject matter experts from across the US, put together this book, trying to explain how people could integrate radar into their workflows, but also remember a time when radar data wasn't so freely available. A bunch of the students that I've spoken to, today, you talked about access to planet data and other sources of high resolution imagery, which, planet data wasn't around 15 years ago. The different tools that are now open source. And so, in this morning's studio, I, kind of did like a quick poll, what kind of software do people work on and whatnot, and definitely heard a lot of open source options out there. Evan mentioned all the work that he's doing in R, other people here using QGIS, et cetera. And so, even that landscape in terms of the, how we process images has changed, and also even the data formats, et cetera. And so I guess things that I'd like to kind of throw out to you, the saying that, the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago, the second best time is now. My suggestion, my advice to folks would be, of course, I think you're all in the right place, literally, as well as in other ways. The best time to pick up Earth observation data science, as some of us call it, as well as do science communication, it's now. So yeah. And so wrapping up in terms of the future of geospatial analytics. Sorry if this seems like I copied some of Kushan Wu's answers from last year, but he gave a really good talk, and I agreed with so much of what he said. I do think in terms of geospatial analytics, we've been talking about big data for a while, and I think we're going to continue to talk about big data, if only because, and I got to see you folks' fancy lab upstairs. You have drones, you obviously have access to satellite data, you probably have access to LiDAR data. There's different models that people are working on. There's so much data out there, and the challenge really is all that data, how do you, as the people who are coming up, how do you sift through it? And so, big data is gonna be with us. And so the key to working with that big data is obviously the machine learning side of it, the geospatial AI side of it, including the different deep learning workflows, the neural networks, the foundational models that we hear about all of the time. And of course, the way to access different machine learning workflows is through scientific computing, through coding. And I guess I was also kind of heartened to hear when I got to chat with the students in the studio or upstairs. It seems like everybody here is already into computing and coding and whatnot, which is definitely different from when I was doing my PhD or before that. And the other thing, and I think that your university is already, your university and different researchers here are doing a great job on it, is communicating the work that we're doing for multiple reasons. And so I have this little acronym that I put together, G, why not? And I'm gonna get into it in just a wee bit, but I guess also, I know that Bruno Sanchez also addressed you folks 2 years ago. I'm a fan of his. I've listened to him on podcasts. I have his book. And one of the things that never really, I guess, sunk in until I listened to his podcast about a year ago. He gave an interview on a podcast called Minds Behind Maps. And he talked about, when he was studying, coming up as an emerging scientist, he talked about the gap between knowledge and skills. And so when I did a biology degree, I think I acquired a lot of knowledge on different processes, et cetera. But in terms of actual skills, it wasn't until doing a master's degree, the skills that I picked up 20 years ago, remote sensing, GIS things, et cetera. Those are the things that I'm still working with now. And I would imagine for so many of you, you're probably going to have a similar experience where what's the capital of blah? That that's knowledge, and maybe that might be useful to you or whatever. But the coding skills that you are acquiring by being grad students in this program, those are kind of things that are going to be useful to you in your professional careers. So yeah, knowledge versus skills. Again, I didn't, when he said it, it kind of struck me. But I guess also to just mention, when I went to the University of Washington, I had I had applied to a joint Master of Science and Masters of Public Administration program. that I got into, but my fellowship was only for 2 years, and this joint program would have been for 3 years. And I asked an uncle of mine, I said, what do you think? And he said, go for the degree that will actually give you, practical technical skills that are gonna help you, going forward in life. And I followed his advice, and I don't regret it. And so, I don't know what kind of programming languages folks in here are working on, but the IEEE Spectrum's survey says that Python's hot, JavaScript is hot. Unfortunately, R is like all the way down there. I actually, R was the first programming language that I started working with, and they had to kind of drag me kicking and screaming to get into R. But now I like really love JavaScript, and because of that, me and Kusheng were two of the first Google developer experts that were designated by Google, et cetera. And so, yeah. And of course, Python obviously is gonna get you very far. And so I'm not plugging books or anything, but just to say, by doing, kind of like the title says, the boring stuff or whatever, a lot of your workflows aren't gonna be GUI based. So please keep doing coding, build up your skills, and you're gonna find yourself with many a job offer. The other thing I'd like to mention before I kind of close it out is, just, be knowledgeable to or be aware of just the I guess where the world is moving in terms of overall geospatial artificial intelligence. It's not a bad thing to have skills related to deep learning and kind of where these things are moving. But of course, even, just I think overall machine learning, and I also had some cool conversations at lunch with, grad students talking about, well, we're testing deep learning approaches, we're testing traditional ML approaches, and sometimes, the traditional approaches might work better than the deep learning approaches, but that's up to you folks to decide. But I guess I'd also like to leave you with, and kind of related to a slide I took from this morning to the studio activity. Geospatial AI is at your fingertips right now. So whether you're, working on, you're working with Earth Engine and regressions there and upscaling things or whatever, to Rebecca and to Delia told me, they both said, NC State also has, good linkages with traditional platforms like ArcGIS, which is, in my opinion, my personal opinion, a beautiful, beautiful piece of software, which also now has linkages with PyTorch and TensorFlow. So just to say, long story short, you have no excuse why you're not like diving into deep learning and machine learning. And you get some really interesting outputs from that. If that's, say, not your kettle of fish yet, I'd like to also point out that the SERVIR program is a sister program to something called NASA RSET that publishes, quite frequently, puts out tutorials and self-paced trainings that you can do. They have a really great one called the Fundamentals of Machine Learning for Earth Science that was from last year, which you can hop on like right now, right after this, and do. And then EO College, which is from the European side, also put together a MOOC, and you're gonna get a certificate for it if you complete it, also called Intro to Machine Learning for Earth Observation. So just to say, you have options. And then also from speaking to John and Marilla and Ross, apparently at NC State, you also have a new deep learning course, right? So register for it, do it. Get that course in there. I'm also, I guess, just a quick side thing to say, I'm also still myself, I feel like, even though I've been working on machine learning things, at least on the traditional side for a while now, I've been putting together my own little, Google Doc, a source book, I call it, of different materials, which maybe one day I'll put out on GitHub. And then very last set of slides, gee, why not? My last suggestion to the young professionals in here, the folks who are gonna be the next gen of scientists at NASA and USGS and NOAA, et cetera, get your name out there. Just a suggestion. And so, like, at least on the NASA side, it's like the high ups are always like, please give us some good SciComm, like I don't have, it's just a cool little meme I put there. You can laugh if you want, but it's just this, there's a hunger for, like, what are the good stories that are coming out of the scientific world? And I think sometimes we have this risk of like, we're working on science and we're like in little silos and we don't want to kind of share that with broader communities, but you have opportunities to do so. Once upon a time, 5 years ago, because I put together memes like this one. I at least on the NASA Marshall Space Flight Center side, I got this award as it for like my endless, like trying to communicate stuff on Twitter, etc. Shameless plug, please follow @BZGO on Twitter. Sometimes I put out cool memes like, this whole idea of, so this one was earlier this year. I got like almost 16,000 views, and it was just this general idea of, it's obvious that we can do forest, non-forest classifications using traditional techniques, but yet you have, one side of the house, as it were, like using deep learning to do the same thing that, with much more resources and whatnot, it's kind of, to me, was overkill. Almost closing off by saying that, however, I'd also like to give a shout out to the Center for Geospatial Analytics side of the house, where you folks are also doing really great work, putting out, videos on YouTube of these different events that you're having. You have an active presence on Twitter. Hope you guys follow me back. And so, you guys are on the forefront of that. And then almost lastly, I think, also just to give some, like one of the things that, I think in the lunch, like, what kind of podcast you listen to? I was like, I'll tell you about Minds Behind Maps. And so Husheng Wu, who presented here last year, he's spoken on Minds Behind Maps. Bruno Sanchez has talked on Minds Behind Maps. There's a great podcast called Seen from Above, which is now hosted by two of the chairs of Geospatial Women. There's the IEEE GRSS that has a podcast called Down to Earth that's pretty awesome. And I think this series, this year is going to focus on, or the series that the new season that's coming out is going to focus on Geo AI. And of course, there's a Mapscaping podcast. And so, I don't remember if this is my last slide, but just like to tell you that, ultimately we need y'all here in the room, everybody here to ultimately, go hard on the geospatial. We need you to be, again, this new generation of geospatial champions. Of course, you're in the right spot. Keep doing what you're doing. And I guess with that, I'd just like to say a huge thank you to the College of Natural Resources, the Center for Geospatial Analytics, to Rebecca, Titilayo, John, Marilla, and Varun for hosting me, inviting me, etc. And it's been really cool being able to stand here and talk to y'all. Thank you.
Any questions?
I have one. So you show the map that clearly highlighted North Carolina not as part of the universities that are networked with SERVIR. What would we need to do to become a partner?
There are multiple avenues, and I think I've mentioned before that SERVIR every few years has solicitations through NASA that we would encourage researchers from here to apply to those solicitations. If I'm not mistaken, one part of a solicitation, or one solicitation just closed, but I think that the second part of that is opening up next year. Yeah.
Okay, so it's not like an MOU or anything like that. Is that map characterize centers or universities that have responded to an open solicitation and get funding?
In other cases, on the SERVIR side, they have also gotten access to expertise through what we call subject matter experts,
Sure.
who are then also contracted to shorter term to support SERVIR hubs, et cetera. But I think there are multiple opportunities for future collaboration. Please.
So SERVIR works under the theme of capacity building.
Boom, yes, correct.
In these different centers across the globe. And that capacity building entails skill building at those centers for using NASA Earth observations, and then I imagine a whole other suite of skills. But what is that in tandem? I guess can you just describe that process a little bit? It's different across the globe at the different centers, but yeah, how does I guess I'm wondering, in addition to the use of Earth observations, is there also other work to incorporate local knowledges, different field expeditions in the theme of, getting data to understanding Earth systems change?
Varun used to work for ICIMOD. Gonna put Varun on the spot because he looks like he wants to provide an answer. Could you maybe share your experience working at ICIMOD, kind of how you guys?
So within like SERVIR program, they have regional hubs, like I was supporting IC mode hub, where we used to collaborate with governments. So idea is to collaborate with government that whatever we are producing, it will be useful for the government, they are going to use it and co-develop it. Within this process, it's like, because government people don't know how to use Earth observation system. So the idea is to train them, provide some kind of training, and this is how it works.
Cool.
And just to, I guess maybe also point out, so like ICIMOD where Varun worked, ICIMOD and these other centers that are part of the network are recognized as they're recognized as centers of excellence in Earth observations or geospatial work. And so on the NASA and USAID side, it's say like topping up or providing additional capacities to these centers that already have extremely skilled staffs, et cetera, but providing support in areas where maybe they don't currently have a lot of that expertise. And so, for instance, ICIMOD, there have been researchers from Brigham Young University who've brought, new flood forecasting capabilities to ICIMOD, et cetera. And then ICIMOD, just because of the way how it works, kind of like a backstop to the governments of the region, et cetera, has been able to take that and kind of spread that knowledge as well. Maybe the flood model as it was worked for Nepal and now applying it to other parts of their regions as well. And so it's a really cool co-development partnership as Varun was saying.
Who's supporting the local scientists and the local hubs? Is it NASA SERVIR or is it the governments that they are serving?
Good question in terms of support. So for instance, the hubs receive,
Like who's paying them?
if I guess using ICIMOD as an example, ICIMOD has member states that fund ICIMOD's work. ICIMOD receives projects, but also I guess the direct SERVIR work is funded partly through USAID. The different USAID regional missions then provide funding for scientific counterparts to do this specific work. I know it's Friday, 3-something.
So I think I do have a question. So you talk about get your name out there. And then the major thing you mentioned is just Twitter. So what if there are some of us that we don't really use Twitter?
LinkedIn then.
Okay.
Blue Sky, Mastodon, whatever. No, I guess part of what I meant by that, I'm pretty sure that like everybody in this room is working on something cool. But it's kind of like if a tree falls in the forest and nobody's there to hear it, and so you're working on cool stuff, but if you're not sharing that cool stuff that you're working on, then folks might not, be aware of because otherwise Varun's working on this. Like, we need somebody just like that. We want to hire Varun when he finishes his PhD, that kind of thing. So, I guess speaking of my own experience or whatever, like when I was a PhD student in France, it was almost kind of frowned on that we would attend conferences and stuff like that in the lab that I was in. But yet it's conferences where people build those networks partly to then say, all right, hey, I'm working on this, I'm gonna be finished soon. Like, do you think there are opportunities for me to collaborate with you, et cetera? And so I think having those connections doesn't hurt, if I could put it that way. And also just as, I've seen cool Twitter stuff coming out of, from Marilla and others, and actually, like, I know of Professor Tilburg's work because of Twitter. There, at least in the past, had been a pretty vibrant and active science Twitter. And so it was particularly during the COVID times when, people weren't going to conferences and meeting in person. It was a way to find out what people were working on and just to, I think, the pandemic also though highlighted like that the world needs science, like ultimately, it wasn't geographers per se that, you know, kind of came up with the vaccines that we took to, you know, kind of fix, you know, what was happening, but I think we all saw that science has a whole lot of value, and I think the general public needs to be aware of the scientific value that you're all producing. And so, like, and also, so much of our work is funded by taxpayers. And so I think too, for that reason as well, I think it's really useful for those taxpayers to know, like, hey, there are people doing some really great work to predict, you know, flooding or, you know, help with food security, predict crop yields, that kind of stuff. Like, there are people who aren't aware, and I think it's on us ultimately to also share it in as much as that's appropriate. Please.
So a lot of this work seems in a very exciting way, really highly applied and yeah, again, in the skill building theme. But I guess even just looking at this map, it covers a swath of places with really complex terrestrial ecology. So do you see also coming out of this applied work, just new understandings of these systems, of their carbon dynamics, of how of climate influences? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for the question, and I guess somebody else from my team were here. One of the things that I guess we often like to, sometimes we think of information as kind of like a one-way street of, you know, like, you know, NASA has generated, you know, these data sets or these models, and NASA's giving it to these regions, et cetera. But other people, you know, in our system have said, no, it's definitely a two-way street where these, you know, global scale models are always improved by, you know, regional knowledge, local knowledge. There are, you know, again, you know, there might be a flood forecasting model that was developed in one part of the world, and in order to make it work for a different part of the world, we need that regional expertise from, you know, people like work at ICIMOD, like Varun did, et cetera. And I think also that flow of information from those regions back into NASA, back into USAID, also enhances understanding of how these things should work. And that's why too, is the words Varun used were co-development. There's definitely also been kind of like a shift in thinking of, we realize that to make something work well, we need to work on it together. We need to see each other as partners. And it's not just like, hey, we're bringing you this, but how do we work with you to bring something, and they learn in the process, and we learn in the process as well. Please, John.
In all of your work in or for various locations around the globe, is there one that sticks out as the most rewarding or impactful? Or two? Looking for some SciComm.
I know the answer I want to give. I guess overall, just to say that it's for me, what's been super rewarding is to have been a kid from humble beginnings to, you know, essentially have been able to become a scientist, and then to be able to work with other people whose circumstances have also been challenging, and to kind of, you know, meet them in different spaces figuratively. But across our server network, you know, we work with people from different regions, et cetera. And even in our office, we have, you know, a lot of folks who come from different server regions, and it's usually rewarding to be able to say, okay, we're able to help scientific development happen, say, in a better way in a focus region that is, say, near and dear to our own hearts or whatever. And so other colleagues of mine rather, have just started up, you know, work again in Central America, where we had a gap of time where we weren't doing work in Central America, and being able to be a part of that process for me has been rewarding, especially seeing there's like really cool stuff that's been done in Southeast Asia that we can essentially kind of migrate some of that technology and science back to Central America, and me feeling like somebody coming from there that hopefully, you know, science will get pushed a little further along in Central America because of that work. Yeah. Otherwise, it's been really fun chatting with you.
So maybe we can give a round of applause and then Yeah, so snacks are in the next room, but you can also mix and mingle and talk to Dr. Cherrington some more.